A city of 10 million people can freeze after just 30 minutes without electricity. Elevators stop. Water no longer reaches high floors. Hospitals switch to backup generators with only a few hours of margin. Data centers cut load. Transactions halt. On paper, electricity is called a public service. In reality, it is the system that keeps your entire economy standing, and the same system that can choke it from the inside. In February 2021, Texas lost power during a winter storm. Over 4.5 million homes went dark. Heating failed while temperatures dropped below freezing. Hospitals stayed open on backup generators. Many did not have fuel for more than 48 hours. Water systems lost pressure. Boil water notices covered entire cities. The grid did not fail because of one mistake. It failed because the system was built to be efficient on paper, not resilient in reality. In 2012, India experienced the largest blackout in history. More than 620 million people lost electricity at once. Trains stopped mid-route. Coal mines shut down ventilation. Mobile networks degraded within hours. The grid collapsed under demand it was never designed to absorb. The country had power plants. It had fuel. What it did not have was margin. These events are often described as disasters. They are not. They are previews. Modern cities are built on continuous power. No pause. No buffer. Data centers assume uptime measured in minutes, not days. Hospitals assume diesel deliveries on schedule. Water systems assume pumps never stop. When electricity drops, everything else follows. The key detail most people miss is this: electricity systems are locked in years before the lights turn on. Through contracts, pricing formulas, fuel dependencies, and grid design. By the time the blackout happens, there is nothing left to decide. The outcome is already baked in. Electricity is not a sector. It is the floor everything stands on. When it weakens, every other system shows cracks. In the United States, the grid delivers power to more than 330 million people through infrastructure where large parts were built decades ago. The average power transformer is over 40 years old. Replacement lead times now stretch from months to years. When a transformer fails, utilities often do not replace it. They reroute load and hope the next one holds. In South Africa, rolling blackouts became normal long before they became news. Eskom, the state utility, supplies over 90% of the country's electricity. Years of underinvestment and political interference left plants running beyond design limits. In 2022 and 2023, outages lasted up to 10 hours a day. Mines shut down operations. Food producers lost cold storage. Small businesses closed not because demand disappeared, but because power did. Pakistan faces a different version of the same problem. The country built power plants faster than it built payment systems. Electricity generation expanded. Revenue collection did not. Utilities accumulated debt known as circular debt, exceeding tens of billions of dollars. Plants had fuel. They were not allowed to run because bills could not be paid. Blackouts followed, not from scarcity, but from accounting. In Venezuela, electricity collapsed after years of neglect at hydroelectric facilities. The Guri Dam once supplied most of the country's power. Maintenance was deferred. Skilled engineers left. In 2019, nationwide blackouts lasted days. Water pumps failed. Fuel distribution stopped. Hospitals operated in darkness. The issue was not drought alone. It was a system that had no redundancy left. Europe offers another angle. In 2021 and 2022, electricity prices surged across the continent. In Germany, wholesale power prices spiked several times over historical averages. Households felt it months later through bills and industrial shutdowns. Aluminum smelters reduced output. Fertilizer plants paused production. The grid stayed on. The economy slowed anyway. Electricity did not disappear. Affordable electricity did. The United Kingdom faced similar stress. Gas prices fed directly into power prices due to market design. Retail suppliers collapsed when they could not hedge costs. Consumers were moved to last resort tariffs. The lights stayed on. The financial damage still spread across millions of households. India's grid shows the risk of scale. Rapid demand growth pushes transmission lines to limits. Coal shortages in 2021 and 2022 force plants to operate with days, sometimes hours, of fuel on site. Any disruption in rail delivery triggered local outages. Large cities stayed powered. Smaller regions paid the price. Nigeria produces enough electricity to power far more than it delivers. Installed capacity exceeds actual output by a wide margin. Transmission losses and grid failures cut supply before it reaches users. Millions rely on private generators. Diesel replaces public electricity at far higher cost. Power exists. Access does not. These examples share one pattern. Electricity systems fail long before the blackout. Failure begins with design choices. Market rules that reward short-term efficiency over spare capacity. Pricing models that hide risk until it explodes. Political pressure to keep tariffs low while costs rise quietly in the background. Modern grids are optimized to run hot. Minimal reserves. Tight margins. Just enough fuel. Just enough transmission. This works until it does not. When demand spikes or fuel supply breaks, there is no slack to absorb the shock. Electricity also concentrates risk. A factory can stock raw materials. A city cannot stock power. Batteries help at the edge, not at scale. Diesel generators by hours, not weeks. Every additional layer depends on the same upstream flow. The scale problem is not measured only in megawatts. It is measured in dependency. Data centers require uninterrupted power to preserve data integrity. Water systems rely on pumps. Fuel stations rely on electricity to dispense fuel. Even cash becomes inaccessible when payment networks fail. Governments often frame electricity as a technical issue. Engineers will fix it. The reality is structural. Contracts lock in fuel sources. Debt locks in pricing. Grid layouts lock in who gets power first when supply drops. By the time outages hit the news, choices are already spent. Electricity does not collapse all at once. It degrades. First through price, then through reliability, then through access. Different countries sit at different points on that path. None are immune. Electricity is treated as a public necessity, but it is built and priced like a financial product. That is the core paradox. Governments promise stability. Markets reward efficiency. The grid ends up optimized for spreadsheets, not for stress. Take pricing. In many countries, electricity prices are designed to be low and predictable for households. Politicians cap tariffs. Utilities are told to absorb costs. Fuel prices rise anyway. Maintenance is delayed. Debt fills the gap. On paper, consumers are protected. In reality, the system weakens quietly until outages become the only form of adjustment left. Look at fuel dependency. Power plants are tied to long-term contracts. Coal plants rely on rail schedules. Gas plants rely on pipelines and global prices. Hydropower relies on rainfall patterns that no longer behave as expected. Renewable power relies on weather and grid flexibility that often does not exist. Electricity looks diversified. The dependencies are not. Consider reserve margins. Grids used to carry spare capacity. Extra plants. Extra fuel. Extra transmission. Those buffers cost money and reduce short-term returns. Over time, they were cut. Today, many systems run close to their limits during normal conditions. Heat waves, cold snaps, or fuel disruptions push them past breaking points. Blackouts are framed as surprises. They are not. Market design deepens the paradox. In some systems, the most expensive generator sets the price for everyone. When gas prices spike, electricity prices follow, even if most power comes from cheaper sources. Consumers see bills rise. Producers with low costs see windfall profits. Governments step in with subsidies. Public money flows to stabilize a market that created the volatility in the first place. There is also a geographic paradox. Cities that consume the most electricity often produce none of it. Power is generated far away, in plants and dams that carry environmental and social costs borne by other communities. When shortages hit, priority flows to economic centers. Peripheral regions face outages first. The grid is neutral on paper. In practice, It reflects power structures. Efficiency metrics hide fragility. A grid that runs at high utilization looks successful. Losses are low. Capacity is fully used. Until one component fails. Transformers overheat. Lines sag. Protection systems trip. Recovery takes time because replacements are scarce and specialized. What looked efficient becomes slow and brittle under pressure. Electricity planning also assumes continuity. Demand forecasts extend growth curves into the future. Supply plans assume fuel delivery, political stability, and functioning markets. When any assumption breaks, there is no fast fix. Power plants take years to build. Transmission lines face permitting delays. Storage at scale remains limited. The system cannot pivot quickly. The paradox is simple. Electricity must be cheap, reliable, and abundant at the same time. Systems are built to optimize two of these at most. Cheap and abundant sacrifices reliability. Reliable and cheap sacrifices growth. Reliable and abundant raises prices. Every country chooses a mix. None escape the trade-offs. Most people experience electricity as a switch, on or off. The reality is a layered compromise. Price controls, fuel contracts, grid physics, and political decisions stacked over decades. By the time the light goes out, the paradox has already played out. Electricity looks simple at the wall socket. Behind it is a machine built from contracts, fuel flows, debt, and physical limits. Once this machine is assembled, it is hard to slow down, and almost impossible to stop without damage. Start with fuel. Coal plants depend on mines, rail lines, and stockpiles measured in days. In India, several major plants have operated with less than 3 days of coal on site during peak demand seasons. A delayed train is enough to trigger local outages. Gas plants depend on pipelines and global prices. In Europe, gas-linked power pricing meant that a spike in LNG prices translated directly into higher electricity bills, even for countries with large shares of nuclear or renewable power. The fuel mix looks diverse. The price signal is not. Next is generation ownership. In many countries, power plants are owned by a mix of state utilities and private firms. Contracts guarantee returns. Power purchase agreements lock governments into buying electricity at fixed terms for 15 to 30 years. In Pakistan, these contracts ensured plant revenues even when demand fell or payments failed. The result was circular debt. Power existed. Cash did not. Plants sat idle while cities went dark. Transmission is the next choke point. High-voltage lines move electricity from where it is produced to where it is consumed. These lines are expensive, slow to build, and politically contested. In the United States, major transmission projects can take over a decade to permit. During that time, demand grows faster than capacity. Utilities respond by pushing existing lines harder. Losses rise. Failure risk rises with them. When a line trips, load shifts instantly to neighboring lines. If they cannot handle it, the failure cascades. Transformers are the quiet backbone of the grid. Large power transformers are custom-built. Manufacturing lead times now exceed 1 year, sometimes 2. Utilities keep few spares because they are costly and rarely used. When one fails, operators reroute power and pray the substitute holds. This works until multiple failures overlap. Extreme weather increases that overlap. Heat waves push transformers beyond design limits. Cold snaps do the same through different stress patterns. Grid operators balance supply and demand in real time. Electricity cannot be stored easily at scale. Every second, generation must match consumption. When demand spikes, operators dispatch the fastest available units, often gas or diesel. These are expensive. In some markets, they set the price for all electricity. Consumers feel this weeks later in bills. The grid stays stable. Affordability does not. Market rules sit on top of physics. In liberalized markets, generators bid power into auctions. The highest accepted bid sets the price. This design rewards flexibility but amplifies volatility. In 2022, several European countries saw electricity prices multiply despite stable generation. Governments stepped in with subsidies and price caps. Public budgets absorbed the shock. The machine kept running. Subsidies distort signals further. Many governments cap retail prices to avoid public backlash. Utilities absorb losses. Maintenance budgets shrink. Investment is delayed. Over time, infrastructure decays. South Africa's Eskom is a clear example. Years of suppressed tariffs and political interference left plants aging and unreliable. Load shedding became routine, not because engineers forgot how to generate power, but because the system had been drained slowly. Renewables add another layer. Wind and solar reduce fuel dependence but increase the need for grid flexibility. Without storage and transmission upgrades, variability becomes stress. Germany expanded renewables rapidly but lagged on grid expansion. Power flowed north to south through congested lines. Bottlenecks forced curtailment and raised costs. Clean energy existed. The grid to move it did not. Hydropower carries its own risks. Dams depend on rainfall patterns that are no longer predictable. In Brazil, drought reduced hydro output and forced reliance on thermal plants. Prices rose. Emissions rose. The system adapted by paying more, not by redesigning faster than the climate changed. Priority rules decide who gets power first. Hospitals, data centers, financial hubs. When supply tightens, residential and peripheral areas are cut before economic cores. In India, urban centers stay lit while rural regions face longer outages. In Nigeria, private generators fill the gap for those who can afford them. Electricity becomes a marker of income. Maintenance is where the invisible machine shows strain. Planned outages are postponed to keep capacity online. Short-term reliability improves. Long-term failure becomes more likely. Venezuela's grid followed this path. Deferred maintenance at major hydro facilities reduced resilience. When failures came, recovery took days, not hours. Cybersecurity and physical security add modern risks. Substations are vulnerable. A single attack or accident can disable large regions. Repairs require specialized crews and equipment. During outages, coordination slows as communication networks degrade. The machine depends on itself to recover. What holds all this together is inertia. Once contracts are signed, plants built, and grids laid out, choices narrow. Governments inherit systems designed decades earlier. Changing direction means renegotiating debt, rewriting market rules, and rebuilding infrastructure. That takes time most political cycles do not allow. The invisible machine does not fail suddenly. It runs hot. It trims buffers. It shifts risk outward. To consumers through prices. To workers through job losses during outages. To communities through environmental damage far from cities. By the time lights go out, the machine has already decided who pays. Electricity feels neutral because it arrives silently. In reality, it is allocated through layers of decisions made long before you flip a switch. The grid does not ask what is fair. It follows design, and design reflects power. Electricity failures do not look the same everywhere. The mechanism is shared. The damage is uneven. Geography, income, and political priority decide who absorbs the shock first. In South Africa, rolling blackouts moved from emergency measure to daily schedule. Load shedding cut power for entire neighborhoods multiple times a day. Large mining operations installed private generation. Supermarkets added diesel backups. Small shops closed early or shut down entirely. Food prices rose as cold chains broke. Jobs disappeared quietly. The grid stayed technically alive. The economy bled at the edges. In India, outages reveal a sharp urban-rural divide. Major cities receive priority supply. Industrial zones are protected to preserve output. Rural regions and small towns face longer and less predictable cuts. Farmers lose irrigation when pumps stop. Cold storage fails during harvest seasons. Losses are local and rarely make national headlines. Electricity scarcity becomes normalized outside economic centers. Pakistan shows how financial structure turns into physical damage. Circular debt prevents fuel payments. Plants reduce output. Blackouts follow. Textile factories halt production. Exports drop. Workers are sent home without pay. The country does not lack generation capacity. It lacks cash flow. Electricity becomes hostage to balance sheets rather than fuel availability. In Nigeria, unreliable public power pushed households and businesses to generators. Diesel fills the gap. The cost per kilowatt-hour multiplies several times over grid power. Noise, pollution, and fuel theft become daily realities. Electricity exists, but access depends on income. The grid loses relevance. Investment flows into private survival instead of public infrastructure. Latin America offers a climate-driven version of the same pattern. In Brazil, drought reduces hydropower output. Thermal plants fill the gap at higher cost. Electricity prices rise. Low-income households spend a larger share of income on power. Industries reduce shifts to cut costs. Emissions increase as a side effect of keeping lights on. In Venezuela, consequences compound. Long blackouts shut down water treatment plants. Clean water becomes scarce. Fuel distribution halts because pumps need power. Hospitals operate on limited generator capacity. Mortality rises from secondary effects rather than direct outages. The grid failure triggers a chain reaction across basic services. Europe's recent energy shock showed that even wealthy systems are vulnerable. High electricity prices forced fertilizer plants to reduce output. This fed into higher food prices months later. Aluminum smelters curtailed production because power costs exceeded product value. Jobs were lost without a visible blackout. The grid stayed online. Affordability collapsed. The United Kingdom saw energy suppliers fail financially when wholesale prices spiked. Millions of customers were transferred to last resort tariffs at higher rates. The lights did not go out. Household budgets absorbed the shock instead. Electricity scarcity appeared as debt and inflation, not darkness. The United States experiences consequences through weather-driven stress. Heat waves in Texas push demand beyond grid margins. Utilities issue conservation requests. Prices spike in wholesale markets. Low-income households face higher bills or service disconnections. Wealthier users install backup systems. Risk shifts downward. Data centers represent a new concentration point. They require uninterrupted power. When grids strain, they secure priority connections or build on-site generation. Local communities face higher prices and congestion. Power flows toward data and capital first. Residential users adjust later. Hospitals illustrate another layer. Backup generators are designed for short outages. Fuel storage covers hours or days, not prolonged grid failure. During extended blackouts, care is rationed. Non-critical procedures stop. Outcomes worsen without dramatic events. The system functions, but below normal standards. Water systems depend entirely on electricity. Pumps move water. Treatment plants disinfect it. During outages, pressure drops. Contamination risk rises. Boil water advisories spread. Households with storage cope. Others wait. Electricity failure becomes a public health issue without appearing as one. Transportation is not immune. Electric rail systems halt. Traffic lights fail. Fuel stations cannot dispense fuel without power. Even gasoline supply chains rely on electricity to move and sell fuel. Outages slow recovery by cutting access to the very resources needed to restore power. Economic recovery after outages is uneven. Large firms absorb losses. Insurance covers some damage. Small businesses close permanently. Informal workers lose income immediately. Electricity outages act as a filter, removing weaker participants from the economy while stronger ones adapt. Environmental consequences accumulate quietly. Diesel generators increase emissions and local pollution. Noise becomes constant. Waste oil disposal rises. Short-term fixes replace long-term planning. The grid loses legitimacy as a public good. Governments respond with emergency measures. Subsidies. Temporary price caps. Public messaging. These stabilize symptoms without changing structure. Deferred investment continues. The system survives, but thinner each cycle. The map of consequences shows a clear pattern. Electricity failures rarely collapse societies outright. They erode them. Productivity declines. Inequality widens. Trust in institutions weakens. People adapt individually rather than collectively. Electricity does not fail alone. It pulls water, food, healthcare, and communication with it. The damage spreads horizontally across daily life and vertically across income levels. The grid decides outcomes without ever appearing on a ballot. By the time outages become visible, the cost has already been paid in smaller, quieter losses. What looks like inconvenience is often economic displacement in slow motion. On August 14, 2003, the northeastern United States and parts of Canada went dark. Over 50 million people lost power. The trigger was small. A software alarm failed. Operators missed a warning. Transmission lines sagged into trees during high demand. One line tripped. Load shifted. Another tripped. Within minutes, the cascade spread across 8 U.S. states and Ontario. The grid did not collapse because it was attacked. Collapsed because it was tight. No spare capacity to absorb the shift. No buffer to slow the chain reaction. Power plants shut down automatically to protect equipment. Nuclear units went offline. Coal plants disconnected. What began as a local fault became a regional blackout in less than an hour. Cities stopped moving. Subway trains halted in tunnels. Airports grounded flights. Traffic lights failed across intersections. Water treatment plants lost power. In Cleveland and Detroit, water pressure dropped and contamination risk rose. Boil water advisories followed. Hospitals ran on generators. Fuel deliveries became critical within hours. New York City went dark during evening peak. Elevators froze between floors. ATMs stopped working. Mobile networks degraded as backup batteries drained. Data centers switched to diesel. Some had fuel for days. Others rationed load. Financial markets had already closed. Payment systems stalled overnight. The blackout lasted hours in some areas, days in others. Economic losses were later estimated in the billions of dollars. Food spoiled. Factories lost production. Small businesses absorbed damage they could not insure. No single actor was blamed. The system worked as designed. That was the problem. In 2019, Argentina and Uruguay experienced a nationwide blackout. A failure during maintenance triggered a protective shutdown. The entire country lost power at once. Trains stopped. Oil refineries halted. Nuclear plants disconnected safely but added to the scale of loss. Recovery took most of the day. The grid restarted piece by piece. Trust did not. India's 2012 blackout unfolded differently. Demand exceeded scheduled supply. States overdrew power. Protection systems tripped to prevent damage. 2 consecutive days, the northern grid collapsed. Over 600 million people were affected. Coal mines lost ventilation. Railways stopped. Mobile towers drained batteries. The grid recovered. The structural pressures remained. Texas in 2021 showed the cost of design choices. The grid was isolated to avoid federal regulation. Winterization was optional. Gas supply froze. Wind output dropped. Power plants failed across fuel types. Operators shed load to prevent total collapse. Millions lost power for days. Heating failed in freezing temperatures. At least hundreds died from exposure and secondary effects. The response focused on emergency management, warming centers, mutual aid, after-action reports. The market rules that discouraged winterization stayed largely intact. Prices spiked to extreme levels. Some households received bills worth thousands of dollars. The blackout ended. The financial damage lingered. These events share a pattern. The climax is never one dramatic mistake. It is a chain of normal decisions meeting abnormal conditions. Systems built to run lean fail fast when stressed. Protection mechanisms do their job by shutting down, not by saving service. Electricity crises do not look cinematic while they unfold. They are quiet. Control rooms watch screens go blank. Operators follow procedures. Automated systems trip faster than humans can react. By the time leaders speak publicly, the outcome is already set. The most revealing detail comes after restoration. Power returns. Lights come back on. Headlines move on. The grid is praised for recovering quickly.
The fact that recovery required days, billions in losses, and widespread disruption fades from memory.
The climax is not the blackout itself. It is the moment when a society realizes that continuity was assumed, not guaranteed. That realization passes quickly. Daily life resumes. The system remains unchanged enough to fail again. The real collapse does not happen during the blackout. It happens after the lights come back on. Infrastructure rarely returns to its previous state. Components stressed beyond limits degrade faster. Transformers that survived overload fail months later. Maintenance backlogs grow. Utilities patch instead of replace. Each repair buys time while shrinking the margin for the next shock. Economic damage spreads quietly. Large firms recover. Insurance covers some losses. Small businesses do not reopen. Workers lose income without headlines. In Texas after 2021, restaurants and local shops closed weeks later, not during the storm. The outage ended. The damage continued. Public trust erodes. People stop believing electricity is reliable. Households buy generators and batteries if they can afford them. Businesses invest in private power. Capital shifts away from the grid. The system loses users who would have funded upgrades. A public service becomes a fallback option. Costs rise unevenly. Utilities raise tariffs to cover repairs and fuel. Governments add subsidies to soften backlash. Public budgets absorb the gap. Debt grows. Future investment is delayed to pay for past failure. Electricity stays on. Long-term resilience declines. Labor drains away. Skilled engineers leave unstable utilities for private firms or other countries. Institutional memory fades. Training pipelines weaken. When failures occur, fewer people know how to fix them quickly. Recovery slows with each cycle. Environmental damage compounds. Diesel generators fill outages with noise and exhaust. Emissions spike during every crisis. Temporary fixes become permanent habits. Climate targets slip quietly to keep power flowing. Planning narrows. After each blackout, reports recommend incremental fixes. Stronger rules threaten profits or political capital. Structural reform stalls. The grid is stabilized just enough to survive the next season, not the next decade. Electricity becomes a divider. Those with money secure backup power and stable supply. Those without adapt to outages and higher bills. Reliability turns into a privilege. The grid reflects inequality rather than reducing it. The collapse is not total failure. It is thinning. Less buffer. Less trust. Less public capacity. The system continues to run, but only under favorable conditions. Any deviation pushes costs onto society again. Electricity was never just about light. It underwrites water, food, healthcare, transport, and data. When its reliability erodes, every dependent system carries hidden risk. That risk does not show up as one event. It shows up as slower growth, higher prices, and weaker institutions. By the time collapse is acknowledged, it is normalized. Rolling outages become schedules. Price spikes become expectations. Emergency measures become policy. The grid does not fall apart. It settles into a lower standard of function. The lights stay on often enough to avoid panic. That is what makes the collapse easy to ignore. Electricity rarely disappears completely. It fades in quality, in price, in reliability. Lights stay on just enough for daily life to continue. Systems keep working just enough to avoid panic. That is why the problem is easy to ignore. Cities glow at night and signal stability. Behind that glow are grids running hot, contracts signed decades ago, fuel chains stretched thin, and margins trimmed to protect short-term efficiency. None of this shows up at the socket. You only see it when the system slips. When power fails, it is treated as an emergency. When prices rise, it is treated as a market issue. When outages become routine, they are treated as normal. Each response isolates the symptom instead of the structure that caused it. Electricity was built to be invisible. That invisibility hides risk. It hides who pays first when supply tightens. It hides how decisions made far from cities shape daily life inside them. It hides how resilience was traded away long before the first blackout. Nothing dramatic needs to happen next. No total collapse is required. The system can keep running as it is. Hotter, thinner, more dependent.
Each shock absorbed by households, workers, and public budgets rather than by design.
The switch on your wall still works. That is the point.
As long as it does, the system avoids being questioned.
And as long as it avoids being questioned, it keeps deciding outcomes quietly, without ever asking for consent.